you so much for joining us. We appreciate your taking your time out of your busy schedules. My name is Evelyn Blanco, and I am an HR advisor with Outlook HR. I have over 20 years of experience in human resources, specializing in employee relations, and I am bilingual in Spanish. Our co-presenter today is Dustin Boss, who is the creator of OSHAlogs.com. Dustin is here today to share his expertise related to OSHA record keeping and share more about OSHAlogs.com. OSHAlogs.com simplifies many things related to OSHA record keeping for employers, including submission of injury data to OSHA, which is the main focus of today's webinar. Thank you so much for being here today, Dustin. Show's yours.
Show is mine. That's a scary thing to say. I'm going to take it. Evelyn, thank you so much for the nice introduction. Really excited to have the opportunity to discuss this topic with everybody today. Yes, I am the founder of OSHAlogs.com. There are a few people in the world that get excited about this topic of OSHA record keeping. I'm probably one of them. I realize not all of you on this call are as excited about this topic, so I'm going to do my best to squeeze as much of this information today, help you with all of this. But myself, we built the software platform called OSHAlogs.com. We built it to help employers. When they have workplace injury, they go online, they fill out one simple online form. This can do all their OSHA records for them. It'll create any state's workers' comp first report of injury at the same time. All these really slick injury metrics. And we've got an entire team to help employers with the nitty-gritty questions about what's recordable, what's not. And we really enjoy working with employers on this issue. We have been around since the fall of 2015. Since then, we've grown a lot. We have thousands of employers logging into the system every day, all the way down to mom and pop shops, all the way up to Fortune 500 companies. Just as we launched, and there's a reason for this little story, just as we launched back in 2015, federal OSHA threw some huge, significant changes at employers around what is required from an OSHA record keeping perspective. They brought new compliance regulations, which required many employers to also digitally submit their data to the federal government on an annual basis. Before that, employers just had to keep their OSHA records. There was a lot to that rule set, but still they had to keep them, and only when an inspector would come on site would they have to provide that information. So this totally flipped the script on employers. It made OSHA logs that much more important. So whether we wanted to become experts in this or not, we had to. And so I continue to learn everything OSHA record keeping related. I could talk your ear off for 4 hours straight at a party about OSHA records. And I will promise, I'll just say, it's probably not the most entertaining thing in the world. So this webinar, again, and this platform that we built is designed to help you avoid those long-term conversations with me. My goal today is to save you some time with this, help you prepare for some upcoming deadlines, and in all seriousness, open your eyes to some issues that a lot of employers aren't aware of, especially when it comes down to what regulation changes are coming down the pike potentially for next year, for sure the following year. So I want to do a little bit of everything today. I'm going to go to A to Z. I want to give you a start from the beginning a bit about the OSHA record keeping rule as a whole, how to organize and who needs to keep the records, how to organize your data in terms of establishments, what incidents do we record. If we get that part right, we're going to be able to decide, do we need to electronically submit this data to the federal government? And of course, as I mentioned, I want to hit on some changes coming up for 2023 and give you some realistic right now, what should you be doing now to get caught up to speed. If you have questions, feel free to use the Zoom question box. Evelyn is going to be organizing those, and she has the power to interrupt me at any time to ask those, or we'll wait to the end of the presentation to get through some of those as well.
Yes, please.
So let's just
bring us sorry, Dustin. I just want to make sure, please feel free to ask questions. Please put them in the box and we will go through them as the webinar goes on. Thank you so much, Justin.
Beautiful. Yeah. So let's start with some overview. OSHA records. There's 3 forms we're talking about here. the OSHA form 300, 301, 300, and 300A. These forms, they've shifted around a little bit over the years, but they've been around for quite some time. And whenever I go through these, I start with the 301. The 301 is the injury and incident report. 301 means one injury, one form. So if Evelyn and I both work for a company, we both get injured, each of us are going to have one of these forms filled out for us. It's one of the first forms filled out when somebody is injured. OSHA tells us 7 calendar days is the length they want from the injury to this being filled out. What gets added onto this form, it is information about the employee. So full name, their address, date of birth, date of hire, male, female. We get also to who treated the employee. Was a healthcare professional, who was the physician, what facility treated them, were they treated in the emergency room, were they hospitalized overnight as an inpatient. And then over here on the right-hand side is really some of the core fundamental information I know Evelyn loves from an HR perspective and helping companies understand where the injuries are coming from and what we can do to prevent them in the future. But what we're gathering here is what the employee was doing before the incident occurred, what happened, what was the injury or illness, and what object or substance directly harmed the employee. And in the unfortunate event somebody does pass due to the work-related injury, we must put the date of death on this form. So again, one injury, one form. Again, Evelyn and I both get injured. One of these forms will be filled out on each of us. That takes us to the next form, which is the OSHA form 300, the log of work-related injuries and illnesses. Each line item is we carry that 301 becomes one line item on this form. So Evelyn and I's injury, each of us are going to be one line item. What's being tracked here, it is stuff from that 301 in addition to more information that hasn't been asked on that 301. We're looking at the employee's name, their job title, their date of the injury, where the event occurred. You describe the injury or illness, the body parts affected, and the object or substance directly injured or made the person ill. I will just tell you, just as a side note, the OSHA inspectors that I know and some of the safety consultants around the country, they're telling me they're getting a lot more aggressive here to make sure companies are completing this section and adding all three elements. Sometimes you'll see on these forms, they're just addressing the body parts affected and they describe the injury, but they don't address the object or substance that directly harmed the employee. So please take a look at that and make sure you are addressing all three in this one tiny little section that OSHA gives us to complete it. The next section is classifying the case. Go ahead, Evelyn.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Can the form 301 be substituted with an internal form with the same information? I'm guessing the answer is no.
Well, it's interesting. So I will say legally you can, and one of the forms would be like a workers' comp first report of injury form, as long as it has the same information that the 301 has. But the reason there are multiple reasons why you would not want to do that. One of them, one of the negatives to doing that is if an employee, employees can request this information. Whether it's in a lawsuit situation, they can have representatives request this information. And sometimes in those other reports, especially in internal documents, you may have additional questions that may ask about what led to the injury or what you're doing to fix the injury situation or what caused it. That could open up a company to more legal havoc, if you will. Mm-hmm. So there are multiple reasons. And as you'll see, when we get to what is changing down the line in terms of what employers need to submit, one of the key ones is if a company is over 100 employees, there's a proposed rule set right now that companies would also have to submit that 301 data. So just be prepared that if you're not doing the 301, you probably will going forward. So just keep that. We'll address that as we go through this presentation.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Yep, no problem. The next section here is enter the number of work-related, so the number of days away from work that the injury caused and or the number of on-job transfer days that were caused. And then lastly, you check the injury column either an injury, a skin disorder, respiratory conditioning, poisoning, hearing loss, or all other illnesses. I know that's tiny up there, but I promise you that is what it says. You summarize those 13 line items. If you have more than 13, you just use the same page and do it again on the other side, but you lump them all together. We're going to take those totals and we're going to bring them over onto the third of the three forms, which is the summary of work-related injuries and illnesses. So all these forms build upon each other. This must be signed by a company executive and must be printed and posted from February to April every year, where employees have access to other employment-related posters. So that is typically one of the first things an OSHA inspector will look for. Legally,
and Justin, that's sorry, April 1st through, excuse me, February 1st through April 30th, correct?
Correct. And we're only posting the 300 or on the 300A. You're not posting the 300 or the 301s. Those have personal information on there. It's only the summary data that we're posting. And again, like I said, one of the first things an OSHA inspector will ask for legally, they can ask for this data up to 4 years back, or up to, I'm sorry, they can ask for it within 4 business hours, and they can ask up to 5 years back. I will tell you, this is just purely subjective. You know, what I hear from OSHA inspectors out there is how quick and how fast and how organized a company can present this information to an OSHA inspector will tell them what? That you got your Safety and Compliance Act together. If you fumble, if you stumble, if you're providing OSHA records that are half filled out in crayon and marker and their error, what else is that going to tell them? What else you're not doing from a OSHA compliance perspective? So it's an opportunity for you to show we've got our Safety Act together right out the gate. And that is always communicated to me by my fine friends over there at OSHA. If you are on the call today and you are a subcontractor, you may be getting these requests, to provide your OSHA records to a general contractor, because all things being equal, if your bids are the same, they're of course going to want a safe employer versus an unsafe, because ultimately they could get pulled into a potential lawsuit if an employee is injured. Progressive companies have also caught on that the reason OSHA is asking for this data is to find problems before they turn into something more severe. So you can use these OSHA records as the ultimate canary in the coal mine of potential workers' comp safety problems down the line. Let's find them early, jump in, fix them before they get out of hand. And then we have to try to put the problem back in its cage here. So that is another opportunity there.
Justin, we have several questions.
Oh my goodness gracious. Let's hear them.
Okay. Did you say each incident gets its own line item? Would there be multiple incidents on one form?
Multiple incidents on that one form, correct. So when you have that OSHA 300, that is the log, hence the term, the log of work-related incidents. So if it is an OSHA recordable, each line item is an individual incident, an individual injury that occurs.
Great.
So for example, Evelyn, if both of us got injured in the same scenario, let's say we trip over the same issue, it's still each of us would have a line item because it's employee based. So it's each individual employee. Each
injury or each employee involved in an injury is a separate incident.
Correct. Yep.
Is this necessary for small businesses for 10 employees and use more contractors?
You will hear the answer to that in my next section. So
okay.
hold that question, and we're going to jump right into that next.
Okay. And then, is there a best numeric suggested for claims to use on the form?
So I think what they're talking about is that case number on the left-hand side. You can use whatever number cadence you want. It has nothing to do with workers' comp numbers. We use our own, we randomize the numbers when we use it with OSHA logs for a particular reason. You know, we don't want to give numbers 26 and then give the impression that, again, there's 26 injuries when we don't want to give that information out. But there's no rhyme or reason. You can use whatever structure you want.
Okay. And then the next question is, if we operate 40 clinics, does the OSHA Form 300A Must it be posted at all locations or only at the headquarters?
So posted at all the locations, but hang on that. We're going to get to that here in a moment.
Okay.
Yep.
And then we have an attendee that missed the beginning and is asking, are these forms for employer of how many employees? What is the minimum employee?
It is 11 or more, but we're going to get into the caveats of that in our next section.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Any
All right,
others,
that's
Evelyn,
it.
real quick? Perfect.
Nope, that's it.
Perfect. So these OSHA records, these rules have been around for many, many years. OSHA's been around for many, many years. And it was back in 2016, one of the last things the Obama administration did was pass this rule set that OSHA has been working on for many years that says, okay, up until this moment, we get access to these OSHA records only when we do an OSHA inspection. That's not good enough. Why? For all the inspection activity OSHA inspectors did, they get access to less than 1% of all the establishments under their regulatory purview. So they flipped the script and they said, okay, employers, you must now digitally submit this data to us, which, as you can imagine, has multiple advantages to OSHA as opposed to waiting for the data through inspection activity. So this was a huge shift. Of course, I know, Evelyn, I know a lot of your clients, you guys that are in California, you got clients all over the country, but a couple states, like in my state in Michigan, we have our own state plan. So I say OSHA, and a lot of you are going, was this apply to Cal OSHA? Yes, it does. It's a federal rule that gets pushed down to the state plans. But a couple of the state plans had to ratify this rule set. California was one of the ones that kind of dragged their feet because they have to go through their own regulatory requirements. And it was one of the last things your governor, Jerry Brown, did at the time before he left office. And that was brought in the fall, I believe, of 2018. So a lot here. And it has been something that OSHA is really getting serious about, making sure employers are complying with this. Unless you've been living under a rock, you know, we have been dealing with this little thing called the global pandemic for the past couple of years. Before the global pandemic came out, this was going to be one of the main things that OSHA focused their attention on. Of course, COVID sucked up a lot of their energy. And now that, knock on wood, COVID is on the back, you know, going away. This, again, has taken the forefront to make sure OSHA is gaining compliance in this issue. We'll get into all the things that they're doing here in a moment. But ultimately, employers who do not, they can be fined. But more importantly, they can open up a full-blown OSHA inspection on an organization if an employer does not do their submission, and that can lead to any other fines or things that they find. So I'm generalizing here, but you're basically granting an open door if you're not doing the digital submission that is due by March 2nd of this year. So the goal of this webinar is to answer your questions, but also to kind of take you through. Do I have to digitally submit the data? What's the easiest way to do that? To answer that question, we need to start a little bit from the beginning and go into some of the questions, Evelyn, that some of your attendees are asking already is, do I even have to do OSHA records in the first place? So I want to walk you through the rule set of how to determine, do I have to do my OSHA records in the first place? And then if I do, how do I organize them? Then we get into what injuries we're putting on the log. Then and only then can we decide how we're submitting this data to the federal government. So all this builds upon each other. That's why it's so important you don't miss one step, because you can't comply with a digital submission if you're not doing these next three steps right. So let's go right into the question. How many employees? Who needs to do the OSHA records? Any employer in any industry who employed 10 or fewer employees in the preceding calendar year is not required to maintain logs during the current year. So that magic number, 11 or more employees. So you can think of how you want. 10 or fewer don't have to do it. 11 or more have to do it in the next following year. Again, Evelyn, being in HR, we love HR topics and we love all the rules that employers have to deal with, right? And some rules have certain ways to calculate number of employees. I will tell you, this is an extremely broad definition of who gets included in that employee number. It's all full-time, all part-time, all temporary, and all seasonal employees. There's some interesting caveats for or exclusions. Family members of a family farm and owners and partners of sole proprietorships and partnerships are excluded from that number. But I will tell you, this is a slice and time calculation. So Evelyn, if you and I own a business and we normally have 6 employees and we get some fantastic idea that, you know what, we want to buy some new furniture for the office and we're going to hire 10 people to help us move over a 10-day period. If we wake up one day and we have 11 or more employees, guess what? We just hit that mark and we're going to have to do the OSHA records the following year. Doesn't matter how long those employees are employed with us. It's a slice and time calculation.
Slice it. Good to know.
Yep. The second exemption has to do with the industry that a company is in. There are certain companies, if they're in an industry with that OSHA considers to be of low hazard, you're exempt from the OSHA record keeping process as a whole. It's all based on a company's North American Industry Classification Code, your NAICS. There's thousands of those codes. There's about 86 that are exempt. One of the unique ones that maybe shouldn't be exempt are full service restaurants. But all the other ones I would say have been exempted over the years because they just, as an industry, do not have high level number of injuries. So insurance carriers are exempt, religious organizations, some physicians' offices, some dentist offices. But again, it's all based on your NAICS code. If you're on this call today and going, I don't know what an NAICS code is, I don't know what mine is. It's actually the Census Bureau that manages those definitions. If you need help figuring that out, reach out to your Colony West or Outlook HR service team. They will help you make that determination and help you walk through where to find that information.
That's a good question.
Yes. So those two are what we're looking at. Do we have to keep OSHA records in the first place?
Okay.
Go ahead. You got questions?
Sorry, we have a really good question. Are remote employees part of the numbers of employees?
Absolutely.
That's what I thought.
Yep. Absolutely.
And then would a hospice service agency be exempt?
Oh, there are thousands of those. And I have a really nice worksheet, Evelyn, that I've got. It's 52 wonderful pages long, and I break down all the NAICS codes. Off the top of my memory, I believe they are required to keep the OSHA records.
I would imagine.
I can validate that after the call and let them know.
Okay. And then you can just email me and I can let the participants know. And will we be providing the PowerPoint? Can you?
Sure.
Okay, you can 100%. Get that to me. Okay.
Yep.
And then do medical clinics fall under physician office?
So there's the way the NAICS system works, it's like a hierarchy. So there's some that do and some that don't. So we really need to get specific, and there's elements in there. So we'll have to get more data to make that determination. But as part of this, we will help anybody who wants help with that.
Thank you. Thank you, Dustin.
Yep, no problem. All right, so now we looked at, okay, do we have the right industry? Do we have the number of employees? Let's look at how do we organize these logs in the first place. I'm going to skip this slide here a second because I'm going to hit that in a moment. So most companies, right, they think as this, I already went through those OSHA forms, and there's that 300 and 300A. Where I see a lot of companies make a mistake right out the gate, if you will, is they're incorrectly organizing their logs. So if we have 4 locations throughout the wonderful state of California, you need to have 4 sets of those logs. You got to organize it by what OSHA describes as an establishment. It's OSHA's fun little definition of a location. 9 times out of 10, it's a physical location where business is performed. There's some weird caveats that we'll get into here in a moment. But fundamentally, if you're listening to this webinar, you've got 4 locations, you got 1 set of a 300 and 300A. You are doing it wrong, and you actually will not be able to comply properly with the electronic submission rules, because all the electronic submission rules are based on each individual establishment. So you need to have a 300 and 300A for each of your locations, or what OSHA describes them as an establishment. I will also say at this time that the exemption that I just mentioned earlier about the number of employees, We look at the number of employees for the entire company, not the individual establishment. So let me just show you with this example. If I have a company that has 6 employees, 17 employees, 25 employees, and 260, I add all those up, it's over 10. I need to do OSHA records for all of those locations, even the one that has 6 employees, because as a whole, my organization has more than 10 employees. So there's a lot of opportunity to take some of the information and apply it incorrectly. So I just want to highlight that key note there, that key fact there. Here's another example. I got a location with 3 employees, 2, 2, and 2. We add that up. We're less than 10. So we would not have to do the OSHA records because we're less than that 10 benchmark. Very important to organize your establishments correctly. There are some weird rules. Fundamentally, OSHA describes an establishment as a single physical location where business is conducted or where services or industrial operations are performed. So one location, one establishment. There, of course, an employer may be comprised of 1 or more establishments, as we just looked at that last slide. But this is where it can be confusing, or some ways to look at the data differently. OSHA tells us we may combine 2 or more physical locations into a single establishment when they meet certain criteria. There's 3 of them. When they operate as a single business on a common management, that's an obvious one. That's usually an easy one to meet. This next one is where it breaks down, where it's hard sometimes to meet that requirement, to lump them together. They're all located within close proximity to each other. The way OSHA describes it on their website is within a block of each other. The last one, the employer keeps 1 set of business records for the locations, another easy one to hit. So let's take, for example, Evelyn and I own a business. We started at 1 location on, here we have most of our employees here. We're kind of bursting at the seams. So there's a building across the street that came about that we can run our warehouse out of. And then again, we grew even more. And so, a little bit further down the road, we have another sales office. Those are within a block of each other. Technically, we can organize those as 1 establishment. The key question, are they located within close proximity to each other? OSHA gives us a block. If you want something very concrete, very specific, you can always reach out to your local OSHA office and say, hey, can I organize these as an establishment? They're going to give it yes or no, and you'll have validation there. There's another scenario where, yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay, we have a couple questions. If an employee declines medical treatment, does the injury have to be logged into this form?
If they decline medical treatment,
I would think so. I would think not. If there's nothing,
I'd have to double check on that.
Okay.
I think where the abuse could happen, or why I'm just thinking out loud, and again, it's just me thinking, is it would allow an employer to kind of maybe rely on that a little bit too much, or abuse that. I'll give you another example, different question, kind of same scenario. If a doctor gave a restriction to an employee and the employee doesn't abide by the restriction, they say they don't believe it, you still have to track that as a restriction on the OSHA log.
Yeah.
Another great question. And I can, yep.
Yeah. And then we have, what are the penalties for non-compliance of OSHA documentation?
It can be all over the map. It'll highly dictate on the mood and the friendliness of your local inspector that day. They have a lot of flexibility of how they can fine and cite you. But I will tell you, typically it doesn't end here from the OSHA record keeping standpoint. This is a starting point. And that's typically what I recommend to employers, is to make sure you get this point right. Less of a chance that they dig deeper.
Right. Isn't it typically when this isn't done correctly, they start to dig deeper, and then like you're going to get more frequent visits, surprise visits. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Think of your kids. If you get one, if you ask them about one of their homework that isn't done, and then you have the chance of jumping a little bit deeper. Hey, could I check that other homework, that one? And so use that same mindset. It works the same way.
That's a great analogy. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, there's another scenario where you can actually divide one business location into two separate establishments. There's four little elements here that need to be met to do that. If each of the establishments represents a distinctly separate business, each business is engaged in a different economic activity, and no one industry description applies to the joint activities of the establishments. And lastly, separate reports are routinely prepared for each establishment. Let's assume, Evelyn, you and I started a business. We own a lumberyard together. We said, you know what? Why don't we start a construction company as well? We got a ton of space here at the office. We got a ton of open, field that we can store all our construction equipment, but we're going to track them differently, separate employees. Just because they both have the same address doesn't mean that we're organizing them lumped together. So you can split them out with these different scenarios. The point here is, if you've heard any of this so far and you're thinking to yourself, I don't know if I'm doing this right. If you're currently keeping your logs lumped together by an employer or unsure of your establishment status, now really is the perfect time to fix this. Because if your goal is to comply with the electronic submission rules that are coming down the pike here March 2nd, you can't comply properly unless you have your establishment set up correctly. So again, one key takeaway: get your establishments right. It's going to set you up for success many, many years down the line complying with this rule set.
Okay, we have a question. If one of the company's establishment has only been open for 2 months of the reporting year, do we still have to comply for this establishment?
That is a good question. I could look, but typically, if you're only open 2 years or 2 months, I don't know that off the top of my head. I'd have to look at that answer.
Okay.
That's a good one. Yeah, I'll find that, and then we can organize these questions, give the answer, and shoot them out to everybody afterwards.
Okay.
Okay.
Then there's a question. There's a question here, and I'm not. Maybe you'll understand. What about mobile service technicians who don't have a brick and mortar to report to daily?
That's a really good question. I'll give you an example of one that we had that works similar to this, Evelyn. Is it really boils down to where they're reporting to, where they're showing up. Two different scenarios. We use a janitor scenario. So let's assume, Evelyn, you own a company and you have 25 janitors. They show up to the building, every day or every once in a while, right? At least once a week. And you give them their orders, and then they go clean different facilities, and make their routes. I have a janitorial firm where I hire and I place janitors in a specific business, and they only show up there and they're only doing business there. I will tell you, I have been told from the OSHA folks that if they're showing up at that same building and they're cleaning there, you need to treat that as one establishment. If they're, coming to the work site and they're reporting to that one work site, and then then they're going out and disseminate. Think of, or like a plumber, somebody who visits different locations. I will also tell you, I've asked that same question to multiple folks at OSHA, and they've given me different answers. So what I would suggest, no matter what, if that is your scenario, you can chat with your, service team member at Colony West and Outlook HR, but you can always get validation from OSHA. Then you actually have their suggested path, and you always have that down the line. If another OSHA inspector, if it gives you a different answer in those scenarios, I always suggest that.
Okay. And then do you need NAICS numbers for all subsidies?
So each establishment that you have, a good question, you need to look at the NAICS for that establishment. So you have an overall company, but if you have different locations, establishments, you need to set the NAICS for each one of those locations, because technically, as you'll see here in a moment, you could have some of your establishments that need to digitally submit to the federal government and some that do not. And it's all based on size and industry. So yes, you need to do that. Could be the same NAICS code as your overarching company firm, but you need to pick the NAICS for each establishment. Everything OSHA does is establishment based. That's how they're tracking the data. That's how they're looking at the data. And think of it from their perspective, they want to know where people are working and what is the injury rates at that location to determine how safe that establishment is.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay. Yep, no
Oh,
problem.
wait, we have one more.
Sure.
What if they are at the same location?
What if they are at the same location? I don't know what they're asking there.
Yeah, neither. Let me just ask them to elaborate, and go ahead, and we'll,
Sure.
once they respond. Yeah.
Sure. So what did we do so far? We looked at, do I need to keep OSHA records in the first place? And we look at the number of employees that we have, and then we look at our industry. Then we looked at, are we organizing our logs correctly in the first place? We got to do it by establishment. We don't lump them as a company as a whole. They got to be done by establishment. Now we need to look at what incidents we're adding on the logs themselves. How confident are you on the quality of your data? How confident are you in the knowledge of what is and isn't recordable? And here's the crazy thing that a lot of employers don't realize: this data, it's being made public. Right now, it's hard to find. If you've been listening to the news, maybe some of the business websites or business, channels, you might hear about Amazon having really bad injury rates and how they have, multiple number of injuries compared to other warehouse entities. Where they're getting that data is partly through the submission rule. So the point I'm making here is we want to make sure we're not over-reporting as well, because that could throw off your metrics and can make you a better target for potential worksite inspection. The other thing I like to address is, whenever I talk about what's on the log and what's not, is understand the difference between workers' comp injuries and OSHA recordables. OSHA records are designed to collect, compile, and analyze uniform and consistent nationwide data on injuries and illnesses, while workers' comp is designed to provide medical coverage and compensation for workers who are made injured or made ill at work, and it differs from state to state. What's compensable from a workers' comp standpoint from California to my wonderful state here in Michigan could be radically different than what is compensable in California. But from an OSHA record keeping standpoint, they're virtually the same. So also, just because workers' comp doesn't mean it's OSHA recordable, and just because it's OSHA recordable doesn't mean it's workers' comp. We need to follow a very specific flow chart or rule set that OSHA gives us. And I built a flow chart. You can find this right on OSHA's website as well. We need to ask ourselves, did the employee experience an injury or illness? Is it work related? Is it a new case? Yeah, we can find some caveats here where we'll have some questions and we can help anybody at the time that you add the injury. But virtually a lot, it's fairly obvious if those are yeses. Where we get most of the questions, Evelyn, is in this fourth section, is does the injury or illness meet general recording criteria? What is general recording criteria? According to OSHA, it's a work-related injury or illness that results in one or more of the following: death, days away from work, job transfer or restricted work, and lastly, medical treatment. The first three, pretty obvious if they happen, right? It's either yes or no. Where we get lots of the questions are on this fourth one is medical treatment. What is medical treatment? We look to the rules, we look to the regulations and how they describe it, see if they can help us here. They tell us medical treatment includes the management and care of a patient for purposes of combating disease or disorder. That doesn't help us much. That's a pretty broad definition, right? But what OSHA does give us are three very specific exclusions that are extremely helpful. The first one, not as helpful, but I will describe the scenario: observation or counseling. If visits to a physician or other licensed healthcare professional solely for observation or counseling is not considered medical treatment. I'll just give you an oddball scenario, Evelyn. Let's say you and I work back in a factory. The factory has a chemical spill somewhere else in the factory, and HR runs to us and say, Evelyn, Dustin, my goodness, you got to go to the hospital because we had this chemical spill. If you did breathe in this chemical, you can't smell it, and you could get violently sick in about 3 hours. We won't know until then. Go to the hospital. Let's see if you're okay. If we go there just for observation, that in and of itself is not an OSHA recordable. If we get violently sick and we get treated, that's another story, but just being there does not mean it's an OSHA recordable.
Makes sense.
The next one, diagnostic procedures, more common one that's used. Diagnostic procedures used to determine whether or not an injury or illness exists in and of itself is not recordable. Let's use another scenario. Evelyn, you and I are working back in the plant. We both trip over a extension cord that another employee so rudely left out for us. We both we trip. We both, our HR person sends us to our occupational med center in town to see if we got injured. Now, me, I'm a delicate flower. I get injured. I break my ankle. I need lots of treatment. Evelyn, you're tough. Okay. So you're fine. You go right back to work. Just because you had an X-ray and an X-ray, that isn't what's determining the recordability. It's the treatment or the issue that we find after that, and then what gets treated from that. So you would go home, no recordable there if everything is fine after your X-ray. Okay.
Thank you. That's a great explanation.
Yes.
And we have a lot of jobs. We have a lot of jobs, Dustin.
A lot of jobs. We're all over the place. We don't rest much, do we? So the next one, this is a most used one. This is first aid cases. There's 14 first aid cases. It's a comprehensive list. I will tell you the questions we get at OSHAlogs.com. A lot of them revolve around here, and we're fine with getting them. But I will tell you, this is what we're going to come back to. Somebody asks us, is this medical treatment? Is this first aid? This is the list we look to, and this is what OSHA gives us. If the medical treatment consists of any of the observation, diagnostic procedures, or anything on this list, it is a non-recordable. I will also tell you that the professional status of the person providing the first aid has no impact on first aid status. It could be an ER doctor, brain surgeon, your mom. It doesn't matter who cares for you here. If the first aid, if any of these 14 are done, non-recordable. Okay. I'll run through the list. First aid number 1, using non-prescription medication at non-prescription strength, administering tetanus immunizations, cleaning wounds on the surface of the skin, using wound coverings such as bandages, using hot or cold therapy, using any non-rigid means of support such as elastic bandages, drilling of a fingernail or toenail to relieve pressure or draining fluid from a blister, use of eye patches, removing foreign bodies from the eye using irrigation or cotton swab, removing splinters or foreign material from areas other than the eye by irrigation tweezers or other simple means. Almost done here. Number 11, the use of massage therapy, drinking fluids for relief of heat stress, the use of finger guards, using temporary immobilization devices while transporting an accident victim. Those are the first aid scenarios. Again, any one of those, if that's the extent of the treatment, non-recordable. Even if you do submit this to the workers' comp carrier and they pay for it, has no impact on whether it's recordable or not. I think that's another key thing people get confused about quite a bit.
Okay, so, we have a couple questions. Okay,
yes.
So going back to the question we weren't quite sure of. So the person that asked about the NAICS numbers for all subsidiaries and said, what if they are at the same location? Stated, we have 4 subsidiaries at the same location.
Well, if you have 4 subsidiaries and you've made the determination that they are individual establishments that follow those same rules, you just look at what that subsidiary is doing and you make the NAICS determination. Don't overcomplicate it, but follow the rules in step, and then you'll get to where you need to go.
Okay, perfect. And then the next question is, so if it is not a recordable case, it does not go on the logs?
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Now, I will tell you, if you are using OSHAlogs.com, which we'll get into, there is a practice that a lot of employers take, as you know, Evelyn, is to keep track of your non-recordables, because those non-recordables can give you insight as to potential recordables down the line and potential workers' comp claims down the line and potential severe injuries down the line. So a lot of companies track near misses, track first aid cases. You can do that. I'm not discouraging that, but you don't track them on the OSHA log. It's going to inflate your injury metrics, and we don't want to do that.
Right. Okay, perfect.
Yep. All right. So now that we looked at the 3 areas, do I need to keep OSHA records in the first place? Am I organizing my records properly by establishment? What incidents are we putting on these logs? Then and only then are we at a point where we can say, okay, do I have to comply with the electronic submission portion of these rules? It's important. They build upon each other. And this is, God bless OSHA for making it so easy for us to figure out. The electronic submission requirements are separate and different from the record keeping requirements that we talked about earlier. Isn't that fun? Isn't that fun, Evelyn? We got another thing we got to learn here. But we're making it easy for you. The electronic reporting requirements are based on the industry and employee size of each reporting establishment, not the total company number of employees. So if we have an establishment, right, one of our locations, an establishment with 250 or more employees, we already determined we have to keep OSHA records. Doesn't matter what industry we're in, we got to submit the data to OSHA. So 250 is that mark. If I have an establishment with 20 to 249 employees, and I'm part of what OSHA describes as high risk industries, I must also send my data to the federal government. Now, when I do high risk, what do you think, Evelyn? Do you think of like a small group of employers that have to deal with this kind of in your brain?
No,
right?
I think of window washers that do high skyscrapers and
you would
things
think
like that.
You would think so. It is actually 65% of all NEICS codes. So 65% of employers when we group them. So it's all agriculture firms, all utility companies, all construction companies, all manufacturing companies, a huge swath of wholesale trade companies, and a bunch of other general industry organizations that have to submit. All in all, 65% of all NEICS codes, fully 2/3 of companies fall into this group.
Wow.
Then, so it's a big group. Then, if you have an establishment with less than 20 employees, you don't have to digitally submit for that establishment. It doesn't mean you don't have to keep the OSHA records in the first place. You got to look at two rule sets. We got to keep the paper records. Do I need to submit? So this entity, go ahead.
If you, where you said that you have to submit it electronically over 250, that's when it's required. Can you still choose to submit it electronically even if you're not required to do so, or is that a problem?
Well, let's look at it this way. If you submit and if you want to pay taxes to the federal government,
okay.
So if you file your taxes and you submit it and you got to pay for it, why would you want to do that? So there's a big part of this is OSHA only wants the right data from the right entities. And part of what our software does for employers too, think of it like TurboTax for OSHA records. If you put your NEICS code in and your number of employees, it's going to show you which ones do and which ones don't have to submit.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So let's use a couple of scenarios. Just some examples here, because I know I can talk fast and I click a lot, and I just want to reiterate this point. So let's start here. So let's go back to our example of 4 establishments throughout California, right? This is Evelyn and I's company. We have an establishment with 6 employees. We have another establishment with 17, another with 25, another with 260. These first 2, the 6 and the 17, now we know we got to keep OSHA records in the first place. We got to do the paper records. But because that location is less than 20 employees, and because that location here is less than 20 employees, we don't digitally submit for those 2 establishments. For the location with 25 employees, that's in that mid-range group, we look at what is the NEICS code for that establishment. It is a manufacturing NEICS. So all manufacturing companies have to submit. So we would submit data here. And then we have this last establishment that is over 250 employees. So we would submit for them regardless of what the NEICS is. So you will have some locations potentially you submit for and some that you do not. That's okay. That's part of the rule set. But you can't make that determination, right, Evelyn, if you're not organizing your logs correctly.
Correct.
What data are we sending to the federal government? It is information on the establishment itself. So the company name, that establishment name, their address, the NEICS code, the average number of employees, the total hours worked, and then all the injury metrics OSHA needs to slice and dice and to compare your company to other companies in your industry. It is data that it's primarily from your OSHA 300A, some other bits of data that we need to send along with it. But that is where it comes. You're not just submitting that 300A, a PDF. You have to digitize that data. It is due by March 2nd of every year. It is the 2022 data that's due this year, right? We're in March. It's going to be March 2023. The 2022 is done. It's all done on the calendar year. So OSHA gives employers from January 1 to March 2nd to submit that data. So we are in that open window, just like taxes, right? You can submit your taxes January 1 and you go until April 15. What do most wonderful taxpayers do, Evelyn? They wait till April 14. So hopefully
Absolutely.
you're not going to wait till March 2nd, but we'll be here for you either way. Employers have a couple different ways to do this. They can type in the data. They can set up a government login. Just like you can with taxes, you can ET file yourself, but there's a reason why companies people use TurboTax and accountants to simplify that, because there's a lot of potential errors and issues that can come about if you do it yourself. Of course, we'll talk about the OSHA Lux product that can do that for you here in a moment. Before we get into that, just a little bit of what is OSHA doing with this data? When you have to sign off, when you submit this up to the federal government, pretty strong language that you need to sign off on. It says violations for material false, fictitious, or fraudulent statements can be punished by a fine or by imprisonment of not more than 5 years or both. Evelyn, do I believe anybody's going to jail this year for not doing their OSHA records right? Probably not. And if they do, they better come up with a different story, because you're not going to act tough in prison if that's the reason why you're in jail. So I'm just going to tell you that. But what's happening, really, in all seriousness, you're creating a digital breadcrumb of your data. So, just an example, the Boeing Max, what was it? The 787 Max that, remember the awful tragedy where two of those planes went down within a month of each other. Then the investigators come and then they start peeling through years and years of data, what went wrong, what didn't go right. And then they come down on the organization. So I know that's an egregious example, but we all know that example. And that is what I perceive that could happen down the line. Just another opportunity for OSHA to come against those employers who aren't taking this seriously or doing it correctly.
Couple more questions.
How is OSHA used?
Oh.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. We are a healthcare staffing firm. We are under 250 employees. Are we required to report to OSHA?
So what I would say, we have to determine your NAICS, and again, is a hierarchy system. So if that company does not know their NAICS, that's step one, and we can help them make that determination. But I can't, there's thousands of those NAICS, and there's groupings within groupings. So we would have to work them through that, but we'll be able to give them an answer, yes or no, but we just need to get their specific NAICS.
Got it. And it says, how can you file for an extension if needed? Is that an option?
Yeah. So you can submit late, just like you can submit your taxes late. But you open yourself up to, another potential, just a red flag. But definitely, if you can't get in by March 2nd, you definitely want to get them in when you can. You have, you can't, eventually OSHA will shut the submission down, the late submissions down. You can't go back any, it's only the 2022 that you can submit now. You can't go back any years further. Okay.
And then I don't know if you'll be able to answer this off the top of your head, but how can we verify whether or not we need to file electronically? An AICS code is 441110. Online, I cannot get a definitive answer.
All right, so we're gonna do this here as what is the number real quick, and I can answer that probably before we get off the call, or we can hang on.
Okay, 441110.
10. Okay. We'll handle this at the end when we're done with questions, and if that person wants to hang on, we can answer that. So I will be able to pull that up.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Couple more sections here. How is OSHA utilizing the data? This is what they tell us. Of course, future legislation. Part of this, I go through this and I kind of, make OSHA be the big bad organization. Fundamentally, they have a role. They want employees to go home healthy and safe to their families each and every day. The statistics show that once OSHA came on the scene, the severe injuries dropped. Deaths dropped. So they definitely have had an impact, and they want to put their energies and efforts in the right place. So if they have this injury data by industry, it's going to help them focus their attention on the right places. Whether or not I believe that to be good or bad in terms of giving this data, I'm just telling you what they tell us they're going to do with the data. So they definitely say they're going to look at futures legislation. They also tell us they're going to use it to target employers for workplace inspections. Obviously, they're going to be able to have access to this data They changed their kind of back end rules, how they target employers. But one of the ways in the past that they would do it, they would calculate a company's DART rate. That is your days away restricted time rate. It's something that they can calculate for each employer. And then they have like a number for each industry. And if a company's above that number, then you have a higher chance of being, visited by OSHA. The interesting thing, they don't publish what those numbers are, those benchmarks are for each industry. That's why we don't want to over-report and make your company look less safe than you are if we're over-reporting the data on those OSHA forms. And lastly, if you look at the original rule set, really interesting. If I had more time in the webinar, I'd go into it in more detail, but how OSHA wants to use market forces by making this injury data public and easy to search, because they believe companies are going to want to, be competitive with their workplace safety culture. They're going to want, investors are going to want only work with safe companies. Employees are going to want to work with safe employers. There's a book called Nudge. I don't know if you remember seeing it. It'd be out by Barnes and Noble at one point, back in the few years back. It was popular. It was yellow. It had two little elephants on it. But they specifically cite that book in the regulations of how do you nudge behavior with minimal impact and minimal people time. By making this data public, using market forces, they believe it's going to create that much more activity without any inspection activity. So just keep that in mind. They want to make this easier to be searchable online. A few more things. The biggest thing we see coming down the pike is this proposed rule set that, in addition to those three groups I mentioned earlier, the 250, the 20 to 249, and the below 20, Evelyn, as I went through, they also want any company with over 100 employees in those high-risk industries that we discussed to also submit all of their injury data from all the forms. So think of that. The data from not only the summary data, but they want to see each individual incident and each individual log. A huge, huge change that is potentially right around the corner. So if you're on this call today, you got to keep OSHA records. You're in that 20 to 249 group. I'm just suggesting take good care and complete those 300s and complete those 301s, because that may be due. And instead of rushing to the last minute, you're going to be all set and good to go if that rule set comes into effect next year or the year following. So just a little heads up, you may be hearing that first. If you don't believe an excitable fella about OSHA records, you can go to the March 28 Department of Labor news release right on OSHA's website, and they talk about this proposed rule set that many in the safety committee believe is going to come to fruition. A few more slides here. We're right up against the hour here. What you should be doing now, look for your missing data on your 2022 logs. Look for errors and mistakes. Update your previous year's logs, because they can ask for up to 5 years back. Submit your 2022 data to OSHA. The simplest way to do that is to get access to a wonderful system like OSHAlogs.com. We built OSHAlogs.com to do many things, but at the core, it's designed to take the guesswork out of OSHA record keeping, make injury reporting a breeze. Throughout the year, or whenever you want to put the data in the system, you get to log in, add an injury in 4 minutes or less. It's going to automatically generate all three of your OSHA records for you. You can also complete your state's workers' comp first report of injury as well. So much of that data is overlapped. You can make changes and update the data. There's no mistakes between the forms, so it's a really slick system. It's going to do all sorts of really slick injury metrics as well. The ultimate icing on the cake, which applies to this webinar, is we have the industry-leading digital submission tool where if you put your data in, we will walk you through the submission. So think of it like TurboTax for OSHA records. We only work with fine organizations like Colony West and Outlook HR. So if you do not have access to OSHA logs so far and you want to learn about that, reach out to your service team at Colony West or Outlook HR, and they can tell you how you can get signed up. A few more slides. Why does this all matter? Really, at the core of it, I built OSHA logs to help companies be more proactive with their employees. Yes, compliance is important, and that's a big part of this webinar today, but I have an extreme passion for workplace safety. I've dealt in situations where employees have died on the work site, and I had to help employers through the awful outcome and all the issues that come after that. It's awful. So I built OSHA logs as a way to help companies look for canaries in the coal mine of potential issues. Typically, severe incidents don't just pop out of nowhere. There's patterns or smaller injuries that can bubble up into something more severe. Fundamentally, it's about saving lives. All of us have families. Yes, we work hard, but we want employees to go home healthy and safe to their families each and every day. And that's why I love doing this webinar and work with Evelyn and the fine folks at Colony West and Outlook HR. And I know we answered a lot of questions throughout. I'm open to more of them.
We have some.
Awesome. Let's roll.
Okay, so are temp employees included on our logs? I believe yes, but wanted a second opinion. It's yes, right?
Yes, I would say make sure you check with the temp service. It's got to be on somebody's log. And the typical response is who is directing the daily activities of that employee. So if they're coming to the job site, they're listening to your supervisors, you are the one directing their work, typically on your log. So yes, Evelyn.
Okay. How many years should we store past OSHA logs? At least 5, since that's how far back they can go, I would think.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the reasons why. From a compliance perspective, they can ask for up to 5 years back. But from a risk management perspective, from a safety perspective, the more you have, the better visual or the better data you have, the data mine to look for injury patterns, to look for issues. And so I say keep them, organize them, use them as an asset. If you have a safety committee, you have a safety program. This helps HR and safety consultants work together, and safety managers. So the data is critically important to help you build and maintain your safety program.
Thank you. And then what if I have no injury data? Also, does COVID count as reportable?
That is a great, wonderful question. So the last I checked, in the wonderful state of California has some very specific rules around what is recordable and what isn't recordable from a COVID situation. Federal OSHA put some rules out, very vague. But Evelyn, I would suggest we maybe send folks the FAQ on, and I can get you a link to that. That's
okay.
on Cal OSHA website as to what's recordable, what's not from a COVID standpoint.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the last one I can answer, we're being asked, when will the slides be available? We will send out an email to all of our attendees with the PowerPoint and answering some of the questions that, for example, the one that Dustin just mentioned. And that will all happen within the next, what's today, Tuesday, by Thursday morning, all of that should be sent out to all of the participants.
Evelyn, I just pulled this up. So the code you gave me was 441110. Was that right?
Correct.
So the new car dealers.
I assume so. That's the code that was in the text. Yes.
Yeah. So for new car dealers, if that is your main industry, what you mainly do, if you need to keep OSHA records, if you have 11, if you have 11 or more employees, and then you fall into the 250 or more employee mark. So you would only submit if you have over 250 employees at an establishment.
Okay, let me see if there's any
more. Out there.
Perfect, thank you. Are there any more questions? It does not look like we have any more questions. Dustin, thank you so much for your presentation today. Truly appreciate it. And we thank everybody who attended the webinar. Appreciate your attendance. And as I mentioned, there will be a follow-up email sent to all of our attendees by Thursday. And we hope you all have we have one last question. Oh, no, it was just a thank you. We have
we'll take that. We'll take it.
We hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day, and thanks to everybody. Bye, Dustin. Thanks.
Thank you.